Hey, I'm Greg Bogus from HaiHai Labs, also known as GreggyB. And in this video, we're going to talk about how and why you should make it really easy to iterate on your prompts when you're building LLM-based apps. I'm going to talk about some of the apps I've been building and how I went from hello world to building more complex GPT wrappers. We'll talk about the Assistants API and this really cool interface they have for editing your prompts. Then we'll talk about this platform agnostic tool, PromptLayer, a CMS for your prompts, and what it indicates about the future of prompt engineer as a profession. Hope you enjoy it. If you're building an LLM-based app, the prompts is like the new and exciting thing, and also the unknown thing that you're probably going to be experimenting with the most. We're all collectively experimenting to try to figure out, does the order of the words matter? Do you have to offer it a tip? All of these guidelines tend to change a little bit for every model too. And so it makes sense if you're going to run a lot of experiments, you want to make it really easy to iterate on those prompts. Back in like the early 2000s, when I started doing web development, I was doing PHP. You'd have HTML embedded in the PHP. If a client came to me and wanted to make a copy change on their website, I'd have to edit the PHP file locally and then drag the file over to the FTP server for production. Actually, I'm just kidding. I would always just edit it live in prod. Copy was commingled with the code. That was the paradigm, right? So you'd have these big blocks of text all mixed in with the rest of your code. If you wanted to make any change to the text, you had to, one, be a developer, and two, you had to go through the deployment process. Then content management systems came along like WordPress. And it would be crazy today to think that you would have to interrupt and involve a developer just to fix a typo on your website or to publish a new blog post. My first foray into LLM-based apps look like this. This is the hello world with the chatgpt API or the chat completion API. It's like 12 lines of code and you've got all of the power of ChatGPT right there in your terminal. This is probably the most magical first-time experience I've ever had with an API. When I start building more complex apps, I would always just go back to that hello world and I'd copy and paste that code, put it into my new app, and then start iterating on it. You start doing more complex system messages. And some of these, you're going to have system messages that are 50, 60, 100 lines long. After just a little bit of prompt complexity, you end up with code that looks a lot like that early 2000s PHP code. You've got these big blocks of text commingled with the code. It doesn't feel good. It just doesn't quite feel right when you're doing this. One of the big apps I've been working on is this, you could call it just an email wrapper for GPT. So it's a little platform I wrote where it runs at haihai.ai. Depending on the email address that you send to, it'll run a different Python script. For instance, if you send a recipes at haihai.ai, you can ask for a recipe. You can ask for whatever restrictions you want, and it will give you back a custom recipe. Is it as good as what you'll find in the New York Times? No. Unless it's like literally from the New York Times. But it is customized. You can be as specific as you want, and it will give you a fair attempt at exactly the recipe that you want. It's basically just a simple GPT wrapper with a custom system message. I built a few of these. After I did that a few times, I realized that, I had a lot of duplication of code there. And I was running into this issue of the longer prompts. And so what I realized I could do is I could just actually extract the configuration from each of these files into a YAML file. And then in that configuration, I define the email address, the first and last name of the sender, and then most critically, the prompt. Let me share a more complex example. So I have another one. It's called Adventures at haihai.ai. It's basically like choose your own adventures that you can customize. So you just send it a description of a story. It will send you back a bespoke choose your own adventure style game or interactive fiction that you'll play via email. And if you want to play with other people, you just CC them and they can join in on the game. At the beginning of the process, I create a synopsis of the story and basically just have GPT create like an outline of where we're going and who the main players are. I pass that in or use that as part of the system message for each one of the turns that we generate subsequently. I just store the prompt for the story synopsis in a text file. And where I'm going to pass in the description from the user, I just use templating. You can use whatever format you want here. And then when I load the prompt in Python, I just open that file and I replace description with the description created by the user. This format gave like some pretty nice opportunities for separation of concerns. Now in my project, I have a prompts folder. This prompts folder just has all the different complex prompts that are used throughout the multitude of apps that are running on this thing. This has been like really nice. There's a number of benefits to using this sort of system versus embedding the prompts within the Python files. One, I just have cleaner code. I'm keeping my Python in Python. I'm keeping the text in plain text. Two, I have more confidence when I'm coding here. So I feel like I'm much less likely to bump something when I'm changing the prompt. I'm just changing text, right? And so I'm not going to accidentally delete a parenthesis or a quotation mark that's really important somewhere else. I have cleaner commits. So when I go back through my Git logs, I can see clearly where I was in the prompt versus changing the code. There's still a couple of issues here. One, prompt iteration still requires the technical skills to edit and commit code, right? And two, prompt iteration still requires a deployment to update prod. That's 60 to 120 seconds on my Heroku stack right now. Let's talk about the Assistants APIs. OpenAI rolled out the Assistants API at Dev Day. Understandable if you missed that announcement. It kind of got overshadowed by all the boardroom drama that happened the next week. The Assistants API pulls together a bunch of tools that make it easier to build complex GPT-powered apps. Conversation threading, knowledge retrieval, and then also it has this really great interface that lets you create and test your prompts from within the OpenAI console. For example, simple app I built is called NYC Schools at haihai.ai. This helps parents and guardians of New York City kids navigate the public school system. It uses OpenAI's knowledge retrieval. So just download some PDFs from the Department of Education's website, put them up in the knowledge retrieval, click the toggle to turn that feature on. The nice thing is you can work on that prompt, and then you can also test immediately that prompt, and you can see what the responses are. On HaiHai now, I've got a whole bunch of apps. Some of these work today, some of them don't. But the general idea here is just that each of these is an email address that's mapped to an assistant ID. And then OpenAI kind of does the rest of the heavy lifting. Assistants API is an incredible tool for getting an MVP off the ground. I would say it probably is like 5x the degree to which the speed with which I can come up with a new idea, prototype it, and then deploy it onto my email wrapper. Assistants API does have some rough edges. It felt like it got shipped a little bit early in the rush for Dev Day, and then it doesn't feel like it's gotten a ton of attention since then. One big other problem though of OpenAI's assistant APIs is it does lock you in to the OpenAI platform. So you might think, hey, I actually use Claude, or hey, I'm using OpenAI for now, but I don't want to be stuck with them forever. So then you might wonder, is there a platform agnostic editor that lets me store my prompts and retrieve them? Last week, I had lunch with the good folks at PromptLayer. Shout out to Jared and Jonathan and Bucky. There's a lot of things PromptLayer does. The way I would describe it is that it's a CMS for your prompts. You can store your prompts in there. You can then retrieve them programmatically, and then they're going to give you the interface to edit your prompt quickly, and then also run tests in their playground so you can actually see what response you're going to get back. You can have collaboration on these prompts as a team. They also have evals, so you can run your prompt, see what response you get back, and then you can grade that response so that as you're iterating on your prompts, you have some sort of objective way of saying, hey, is this actually getting me better results than the last one was? This is going to add the quantitative aspect to your experimentation and the more disciplined aspect to your experimentation. They also will give you analytics. So you can set it up so that basically all of your requests are going through PromptLayer as a proxy before they hit OpenAI. Actually, I'm not sure if that's true. I think it might actually just be that you can pass the response from OpenAI back into PromptLayer after it happens. Although that's a good question to ask them. I'm not sure the mechanism by which they get it, but however they get it, they get the data about your pricing and your token usage, etc. One thing I think is really cool about PromptLayer is that they actually believe that there is going to be a class of knowledge workers called prompt engineers. And PromptLayer is making a bet that prompt engineers are going to be a really important part of the future of software and the future of business. Being able to write these prompts, knowing like the right words to say, And then also knowing how to build a system so that you can sort of prove that. So it's not just like intuition, but you actually can say, look, like we tried this and this and this, and here's the score that shows that version 12 was better. And also version 12 is costing us, 27% less. I think there's going to be a lot of demand for that type of person inside corporations. They're building a tool for prompt engineers, and you don't need to know Python to be a prompt engineer. At least you shouldn't. With as fast as things are moving, it does seem prudent to build in the infrastructure for multi-sourcing early in your application's lifespan. And PromptLayer, I think if they continue to iterate on this and continue to deliver on the promise and execute on their vision, I think it'd be a really cool tool for that. I think we're also just going to see a lot of other tools and techniques evolve. And the best practices are going to be that you extract your prompts somewhere outside of your code. And it's going to be really interesting to watch how that happens. I would love to hear what has worked for you. What formats have you learned worked? Are there other solutions similar to PromptLayer that you'd recommend checking out? Would love to hear your thoughts on all this. So thank you very much.